Hey, in this video, I'm going to go over the latest version of Cubase. Cubase 11 just dropped and it looks great. There's a lot of new features in there that are very enticing. But what I want to do in this video is help you make the decision whether you need to update to this one or whether you can wait till the next version. Cubase isn't the cheapest software out there, and upgrading every year can get pretty expensive. To me, it still is the best program out there that does everything. And that's why I keep using it. And I feel like we do pay for those features, but in a lot of cases, they are worth it. So I'm not getting paid to make this video, but I was given the software for free. So these thoughts are definitely my own. When you open up Cubase for the first time, if you open up a blank project, the first thing you're going to notice is nothing, because the user interface hasn't changed much at all for the most part on the main page. There are definitely some changes that you're going to find under the hood, but there is nothing that looks different as far as the general layout of the program. And you know what? I bet you a lot of people are actually going to be pretty happy about that, because whenever they change the user interface, half the people are super excited, half the people are frustrated. So let's just start with my favorite feature of all of them, which is the sampler track. So let's go over to loops and samples, and I'll just show you kind of what I did here. We've got a couple of new libraries in here as well, which is kind of cool. We've got this Night Call, this Lo-Fi Dreams, which definitely fits my style. So let's go find a drum loop in here. I'm going to go. Let's right-click this and check Create Sampler Track. Now we look at the sampler track, we can see a few new things down here at the bottom, and it looks a lot like Backbone. You'll see now that we can take these things from the sampler track straight to Backbone, as well as other things over here. Let's go with the loop that's 95 beats per minute so we can see how this works with changing tempos. So I'm going to drag this one right into my sampler track just to replace the one that's in there. We can see that it is off. In order to get this loop to match up to the tempo of the song in the sampler track, what we need to do is click the audio warp button, and then we're going to sync it to the tempo of our song. If I click this little drop down here, we can see bars and beats. That looks more like it. The other option that we can choose is slice. And then when I drag this MIDI drag and drop, put it on the track, now I can hear that just like a Rex loop, this has been sliced up for me. So we can now go in and quantize that, completely change it, only use a couple of the slices. We can see on our keyboard. So you can hear on this sample right here, there's a bit of a at the end of it. And we can just do really nice things like put a 50 millisecond fade out at the end. And it just fades that out nicely. Another thing I noticed with some of the more complex loops that I was trying to slice up is that it was putting in too many of these little hit points. And if that happens, like, yeah, let's try this one right here. And then I'm going to go to slice. You can see it's given me a couple of slices where I don't need them, like right after this kick. So what we could do is obviously drag the threshold down the other way so we get a few less slices. But by the time I've gotten rid of this slice right here, I've lost pretty much everything else too. So what I can do is crank this up so that all the things that should have a slice. But then, in order to get rid of these, the easiest way is just to go Option and click, or Alt and click on any that are there that shouldn't be. Another method would be to turn on the slice, and what I could do now is set the minimum length, because you can see that that slice is pretty tiny. Let's crank the minimum slice up to, let's just keep cranking it up until we get rid of those kick ones that we don't want. You can see them dropping away now. So now I've got my slices set exactly where I want them very quickly without going through an option clicking on any of these little slices that I didn't need. Now here's a question for you that I was asking myself. Why not just do this in Groove Agent SE? Because you can do all of this kind of stuff in Groove Agent as it stands. And to me, it's way easier to slice things up in here than it is in Groove Agent. For starters, I've got my resolution really big right now, but normally I don't work this big. But Groove Agent is so tiny, and until they make that interface scalable so we can make it bigger, I'd way rather work in here and then just click the button that sends this information over to Groove Agent. So a couple other new things: we can put some filters on, we can play with the pitch, we can play with the amplitude, we can put an LFO on. So if we want to use the LFO, we just click this little mod button, and then we can see LFO1 and LFO2 right here, and they would apply to any of these parameters that are using LFOs. So just click the mod button for any one of these, and so turn the filter on, click the mod button, and then now you'll see the LFO pop up, and we can choose the waveform for the LFO, we can choose the speed, and all of that kind of stuff. So using the sampler track on something like a bass, if I go over to this bass right here, so this is just one bass sample, and you could go in and press the normal mode for a sample. If your sample had any kind of movement or shape to it, if you didn't have this audio warp option, all it would do is just speed things up to make a note higher or stretch things out to make a note lower. With the audio warp, you're going to retain any of those rhythmic elements in your sample. Oh, and then this glide feature is really cool. So those are my favorite updates to the sampler control. And what I would love to see is an auto sampler built into Cubase. It's very easy for you to have a sampler track and just take any old chunk of audio or a MIDI file, drag it right onto the sampler, and then now you've got that as a sampler track that you can then slice up. What are some of the other reasons to update? The next biggest one to me is the key editor. One of the new features is the scale assistant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this lead right here and then go over to the scale assistant. And scale assistant is just a little bit more powerful now. We can use the chord track. So if I put my chords up top here in a chord track, I could have the scale assistant go and transform the notes for me on the fly. So very useful for people who don't play keyboards. So I go over to the scale assistant, and I am just going to use an editor scale on this one because it is just in E minor. So it's going to snap live input. And you can see that I'm playing all white notes, but technically there's an F sharp in here. So the key for E minor just has one sharp in it. All I have to do is play the white notes, and I can solo around this, and it's going to fix the notes for me. And then I'm going to put some chords up here in the top. And then now I'm going to go to my Rhodes, and I'm going to use the chord track, and I'm going to set it to chords, and watch what happens here. While I'm in the G area, it's only letting me play a G chord. And then while I'm in the C, only a C chord. Now E minor. So I can basically mash my fists against the keyboard and make music. And then you can see what I played, which is quite disgusting. Let me go quantize pitches. Now the problem with that is it's probably going to have some overlapped notes, which is not good, but let's just listen to this. So I'm going to select all of those notes, MIDI, functions, and delete doubles. And that's going to get rid of any notes that have a note underneath them. So one way for you to go through and just play stuff without actually playing keyboards. So what else has changed in the key editor in Cubase? And if you're a film composer, you spend a ton of time in the key editor. And another new feature they've added, which I love, is this global tracks thing. In order to find these global tracks, you can't be in this lower zone key editor. So you have to open the key editor in a separate window. Now I can see over on the left-hand side, we can see global tracks. So if I turn this on and turn my markers on and my chord track, now in the key editor, I can see all of that kind of information. And this becomes even more important when you're working with video. So there's many, many times where you're kind of Mickey Mousing the MIDI notes to some kind of chunk of video. And now you can do that right from the key editor. Before you couldn't see things like your marker tracks and stuff in the key editor. So, okay, so a few other changes in the key editor that are definitely worth mentioning and I am going to love. Modulation has just become a lot easier. So before you draw in your modulation with the pencil, hold Alt or Option and just drag something like this in, and you get a curve that looks like this. And then if you want it to look a little bit nicer, we turn the snap off so that we get a more fluid type of change. But it got kind of ugly sometimes when you're copying and pasting. And so what they've done now is that they've got this little control that pops up between 2 points. And if you click this point, now we can do these beautiful curves that don't have a million points in between them. So that is going to be very beneficial to those of us who use this kind of controller information a lot. I love this new feature. That's probably, up there in some of the more important features. And it seems kind of not that important, but it is, because it's going to make things like expression curves and stuff like that so much more fluid. And sometimes you'd notice these weird jumps if you're using these points as we had to before. So very nice new feature. And on that note, we've also got some changes to pitch bend, and they've made this extremely easy to control. So right now I've got snap on, and it's snapping to the pitch bend value. As far as effects go, so let's have a look at the frequency plugin. I'll go to EQ and frequency. And this one has been around for a while, but it's got some new changes. This is a great EQ. We've got 8 bands that you can mess around with, so loads to play with. And just like normal, we can see all of our audio and the changes made, but there's a new feature, and that's this new dynamic section on each band. And so what you can do here is you can set a threshold at which the compressor is going to kick in. So it's an EQ, but it's a compressor too. So we can choose a certain range of frequencies that are going to get compressed or squished down if they pass a certain threshold. So of course we could use this for things like de-essing. So if you've got S's that are sticking out, you go over to the higher frequencies, you find out where the S's are, and you squish those frequencies down only when those frequencies pass that threshold. And that's the key thing with this, is that if your audio is too bright in one little spot, like say on S's, and then you go and just EQ and bring the EQ down at that point, well then everything else that goes through the track or goes through the EQ is going to get those frequencies removed. Often you might have an actual bass note on a synthesizer or on a bass guitar that sticks out. You can find that problem spot, and anytime the note actually hits that spot and is too resonant, is too loud, you can have the compressor kick in and bring that level down. But the rest of the time, it won't touch those frequencies. And that is huge. Dynamic EQ has so many different kinds of uses, and it's great to have that included in Cubase now. The next plugin that we'll have a quick look at is the Squasher, and they're calling it the EDM plugin or EDM tool or something like that. But to me, this is just useful for pretty much anything. It's got both this and frequency have multiple sidechain inputs. So with the Squasher, you could have multiple sources coming into this plugin to duck the level. So make for some really interesting sidechain control. So another thing is they've updated some of the score features, so we can make some changes over here in the properties setting. Let's set this to 16th notes and reduce rest. That's already looking a lot better. I can select notes and then go and change properties to the notes over here as well. So it's nice that they're still updating that, even though they have their own software, Dorico. Other plugins they've got in here now, if I go over to Spatial and I go to Imager, we've got another nice looking new plugin that will give you phase visualization of your audio. It's interesting to see them throwing some of these high-end mastering features into Cubase. Again, trying to make this program sort of work for everybody, which is kind of a lofty goal, but I do feel like they're getting there. Is that feature something I'm going to use? Probably not a ton. And the same thing goes for this new analyzer, the Supervision. It looks extremely powerful. You can visualize your audio as so many different things. That's going to be important to a lot of people, though, I do believe, because you used to use programs like Wavelab to take care of those jobs. And again, they're throwing this stuff right into their own flagship program. Speaking of which, they also took spectral layers and included a very scaled down version of it with Cubase. And the only thing it does is separate vocals from music. So let me show you this chunk of audio from a song I'm working on. It's going to be on the channel soon under the machine videos, but let's have a listen to this. And you can hear the vocalist, this girl Olivia, singing.
Slowing down.
So what I've done with this chunk of audio is I've clicked on it, I go up to Audio, Extensions, and then go to Spectral Layers. That's going to show up down in the lower zone. Don't even need to go to a different program. And then all you have to do is select the audio and go over to Layer and choose Unmix Vocals. Very good vocal removal out of the mix. So those are my thoughts on the newest features of Cubase 11. I do think it is a really valuable update. And the biggest one to me, though, that I didn't mention is that Cubase Artist now includes Vari audio. And that was always something that I would ask people when they're saying, which version should I buy? The thing I'd always ask is, do you need pitch correction? Because Cubase Artist didn't have Vari audio in it. And I find it extremely powerful, extremely useful. And sometimes it's just fixing one note just a little bit. But it didn't have that in Cubase Artist, and it does now. So definitely worth the price of admission for somebody who is a Cubase Artist user or somebody thinking about buying it in the future. So I'm very happy that they've added that to that version. But hopefully that helps you make the decision on whether you need to update now or wait till a later version. So I'll be posting a lot more videos on Cubase Pro 11 in the coming months. So make sure you check back, hit the subscribe button and the bell and all that. And we'll see you in the next video.